Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Preserving History and Democracy. I'm Cynthia Mendoza, and today I am joined by our producer Bernardine Caporale and our recording and filing supervisor Angelica Valenzuela. Welcome, ladies.
Good morning.
Still morning.
Still morning.
How's everyone doing?
Doing good.
Doing very well.
Excited for today's topic. Right, Bern?
Today we are going to be discussing a true crime,
Ooh.
which took place in the city of Las Cruces back in 1900 when it was still the wild, wild west. It's the story of a murder, a trial, and a hanging, Wild West style. It was the last public hanging in the city, but first, we have a special guest to give us some details on the story, and we're so happy to have him here. We'd like to welcome our guest, Dennis Daly, Department Head of the Archives and Special Collections at the NMSU Library, and also a member of BRAG, the Border Regional Archives Group. They put together an annual Archives Bazaar every year, and thank you so much for coming today, Dennis.
I'm so happy to be here.
Welcome.
I've been looking forward to this.
Good. Yeah,
Gonna be
us too.
Yeah.
You're on the VIP list.
Oh, wow. Did not know that.
Yes. Can you talk about the work that you and your team do at NMSU?
Sure,
Before
absolutely.
we get started.
Yeah. So I work in the Archives and Special Collections at the NMSU Library. And basically what we do there is collect and preserve and then make available to the public, to anyone, the history of southern New Mexico and the U.S.-Mexico borderlands and the Southwest more generally. So we do this by collecting papers of families and individuals and the records of businesses and organizations and things like that. We collect those things, we organize them, because it's hard to use stuff when it's not organized. You all know all about this because you're very organized.
Yes.
Yeah. So we organize the things, and then we create guides to them, and that's basically what researchers use to find what we have in our collections, and then we make them available so people can come in and use anything that we have. We have quite a large collection. I know some of you have been over there and have been able to do a tour of the department, but we are on, our collections are on 3 floors of the Branson Library on campus. And one of those floors is dedicated to the university archives. Those are the records of the institution going back to the very beginning. Hiram Hadley's papers, the first minute books of the Board of Regents of the university. A second floor is dedicated to what we call special collections. And generally special collections are published materials. So those might be books or journals or maps or newspapers, which is going to come into play in what we're talking about today, because we do have a lot of historic newspapers from the Mesilla Valley, both English language and Spanish language newspapers. And I've really been mining those, especially the Spanish language newspapers, for this story that I've been looking into here. And then the third floor that we have is dedicated to the Rio Grande Historical Collections, and those again are papers of families, individuals, businesses, organizations, but all in southern New Mexico in the borderlands region. And those are quite extensive. We have records of papers of families such as the Amador family, which was a prominent family here in the 19th century and early 20th century, the Freudenthal family, the Armijo family, Albert Bacon Fall, who was a lawyer and a judge here in Las Cruces, and then went on to become one of the first senators from New Mexico when New Mexico was made a state, later became Secretary of the Interior, and then got in a little bit of trouble, ended up in prison. That's quite a story.
Quite a story.
It's a story for another podcast.
Those are the collections that seem the most fun because they're so personal.
Yeah, so those things have a lot of personal papers in them. In fact, a lot of them are filled with correspondence, which is about the most personal type of document that you can imagine.
Right.
Letters, people writing from one family member to another, or
that
from
are meant only for that person.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
That's personal.
And now we're making them available to everybody. So there's a little bit of how would the people feel about that? Well, the collections that we have are donated to us by families, but generally it's their ancestors' papers.
Right.
We hope.
Well, do you get a haunting? Do you get hauntings? Wait, don't be sharing
That's some
that.
personal information right there.
Anybody pulling your toes at night?
Well, it's in some ways it does. I mean, it does enter the conscience. That I mean, we are sensitive to the fact that we are making available very personal materials in some cases, but the information in them is so important for the history, and it provides a point of view that you can get in no other way.
Very
So, for
unique.
instance, the Amador family papers. So the Amador family, the mother and father, Martin Amador, Refugio Amador, they came here in the 1850s. They had 7 children that lived into adulthood. So the papers consist of the correspondence of the parents and also all of the children with their family members, friends. A lot of the correspondence is between the sisters. So the sisters writing to each other because they lived in Las Cruces, in El Paso, and in Juarez. So, they were always in different places. There were no telephones back then. So the way to communicate was through letters, and they would write letters every day to each other.
Wow.
We have about 15,000 pages
Oh, wow.
of correspondence just in that collection.
Wow.
That's crazy.
I feel like it's just amazing that they saved all.
Yeah,
It's
that's
a
incredible.
miracle. It's
a
a miracle.
Yes, it's a miracle.
It's a miracle that all of that was saved.
It was meant for. It was meant to be, though.
So why did they save it? And they obviously, the person who saved it, who was probably one of the daughters, Clotilde Amador, she was the last of the siblings to pass away in 1960. She had all of this stuff in the family home. She saved it for some reason.
Yeah.
It was personal to her, but hopefully she knew that it had historical significance.
I think so.
And so hopefully, I hope that she would be happy that people are able to access this and get a view on the Mexican experience in the borderlands at that time, after this area had been taken over by the United States. So, yeah.
It's amazing.
It's incredible that you
We're-
guys hold all that history.
We're in the process of digitizing all of the correspondence in the Amador family papers. It dates from about 1860 to about 1940, 95% Spanish language. And we got a grant from the National Endowment for the Humanities to digitize all of that correspondence. And we're about a little over halfway through that project. And
great.
And it's
great.
all going to be available online.
I love that. That's
Searchable.
incredible. We'll definitely
That's
have to do
amazing.
a podcast topic about the Amadors. I feel like that's a very extensive, long episode that'll be, so
Yeah.
I'm excited for that one.
Hopefully
Cool.
you'll be back.
Yeah,
Yeah.
join us for that one.
That would be great. Anyway, that's basically what I do and who we are down there. And we're open to the public. Anyone can come in and
Nice.
use anything that we have in the collections. We're there Monday through Friday.
And I know that you're a very important part of BRAG, the Border Regional Archives Group. And tell us a little bit about BRAG and what we have coming up in October.
Oh, sure. The Border Regional Archives Group is a sort of a loose organization. We're not like a nonprofit or anything like that. Consisting of people who work with archival materials in the Borderlands region here in southern New Mexico and West Texas. And so you all have been a great partner with this because
We
you
do what
hold
we can, not too much, not much, but yeah, and it's been amazing.
It's
to
great.
be
Well, everyone always
part of
comments
it.
on the records that you all
Oh,
bring
cool.
to the Border Archives Bazaar, which we'll talk about in just a second. So basically, this group was put together first so that we would all know each other and we would all know the collections that one another have, because ultimately what our purpose is to provide access to this material to the people. There's no reason to keep all this stuff for no other reason. So we want to provide as wide of access as we can. People come to us looking for stuff, and we don't have everything. So it behooves us to know, well, we don't have a document like this, but the Doña Ana County Clerk and Recorder's Office might have something, or the archives over at UTEP, or the White Sands Missile Range Archive, or Eastern New Mexico University Archive, etc. Because there are so many organizations, both in government offices, in academic institutions, historical societies, museums, that hold these archival records that have this very valuable primary source information. So the goal is just to that we know each other, and then also to bring it to the light of the public. And so one thing that we do is annually we host what we call the Border Archives Bazaar.
Very fun.
Very fun event. Yeah,
It is.
Yeah.
It's very fun.
I got to go for the first time last year, and it was awesome. I didn't know what to expect, but it was incredible seeing all these organizations with just their own archives, and you're gonna find something there that you like. It's pretty incredible.
Yes.
So.
It's amazing what's out there.
Yeah.
It's amazing what's out there in all of these institutions. And so that event happens in October, usually each year, because October, you may know, is American Archives Month. Or you may not know that. It's kind of obscure. But so we usually hold the event in October, and most of the time we've had it at the New Mexico Farm and Ranch Museum here in Las Cruces, which is great for us. It's a great facility. They have a great room. They give it to us for free every year, which is nice. They have an auditorium, so we have speakers as well talking about the history of the region and the importance of archives in preserving the history.
We've had some great speakers.
Yeah, we have.
That's been fun as well.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate we can't see it all because we've had some really good ones.
Yeah. Last year, let's see who was here. Yolanda Leva from UTEP. She runs their oral history institute, and wonderful speaker. David Romo, a historian from El Paso and from UTEP. And yeah, we always have great speakers. And so, yeah, everybody brings out materials from our collections, and it's just amazing. And
open to the public, free.
Yeah.
Free, y'all.
Right.
Can't beat free, especially with today's economy, right? So
Yes,
pretty
and
cool.
and you have the chance to see it up front, see these old archives in person. Sometimes you get to touch them, handle them, and my experience has been we've had people find family references in our documents that we've taken. Which, what are the chances? Because you pick and choose what you take.
Right.
So
Right.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it's fun. Check it out.
We usually get
Look out for it. Everywhere.
we usually get a few hundred people who show up during the day. We're there usually on a Saturday all day long, and we get a few hundred people who come out for it, and yeah, people enjoy it. And one of the things with archives, a little bit different than museums, where you really can't touch museum artifacts, and you shouldn't touch museum artifacts. Archives are meant to be handled and to be used, and so people are often surprised. You mean I can touch this letter from 1890? And so yeah, it's a fun event.
It is very fun.
Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, what are we talking about today?
So today, what I wanted to talk about was Bernardine was mentioning this. It's a story about a gentleman. Well, gentleman might not be the right term after we start after we get into the details.
Into the story, yeah.
But a man here who was arrested and tried for murder in 1901 and hung here in Las Cruces at the Doña Ana County Courthouse, right behind the courthouse, when the courthouse was located in downtown Las Cruces. Wow. You might know Court Street downtown. It's called Court Street because that's where the courthouse was.
Oh, wow.
So it was on.
Okay.
Yeah, Court.
I've always wondered where that old courthouse was.
Yeah, right now the J. Paul Taylor Academy.
Okay.
That's where the old courthouse was. Yeah.
Wow.
I think it's the J. Paul Taylor, or is it the Alma? Yeah, it's the J. Paul Taylor Academy that's there. So that's where the courthouse was. This person, his name was Toribio Huerta, and he was hung behind the courthouse, up behind the jail. And so it's an interesting story. And the way I kind of found this story is through a book. This book, which I have here, which if we're on camera you can see, if we're not you can't. But this is I'm into folk music, traditional musics of anywhere really, but traditional music of Mexico, and New Mexico is a particular interest. This is a book called Hispanic Folk Music of New Mexico and the Southwest by a guy named John Donald Robb, who was actually a professor of music at the University of New Mexico for many years in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. And he was writing classical music, but he became interested in the folk music of New Mexico, and New Mexico has incredibly rich musical traditions. And so he would go out and record people singing these old songs and transcribe them and write the music out for them. And anyway, this is one of his major books. You can see it's pretty big. And in this book is a corrido.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Okay,
you heard of a corrido?
Nice.
Yeah.
What's a corrido?
I couldn't
How would you
explain
describe
but
it?
I would say it's like a
It's
more like eccentric
dancing,
kind of
yeah.
like you're definitely gonna dance to it. It's
That's
not
what I
like
was gonna
You're going to
say.
dance to it.
So-
Okay, yeah. So a corrido is...
That's the corrido that we know anyway.
I know, it might be
Play at the
different.
15s, no?
Yeah. So corridos these days are more danceable than they used to be.
okay.
So it used to be, corridos these days are usually, in musical terms, are in 2/4 time. It's a
Okay.
and it's really lively, and you do the polka. And traditionally, corridos were done in 3/4 time, which is a waltz time. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. So anyway, a corrido, it's a tradition that comes from Mexico. Really, it really comes from Spain. It comes from a tradition of musical tradition in Spain called the romance, which is a type of, it's almost like epic poetry, but it tells a story.
Okay.
And when you talk about sort of the details of the music, it's, there's a certain rhythm to these old romances, which the corridos that we know today have that same. There's 8 syllables per line and 4 lines per verse.
Okay.
And then there's not like a chorus usually. It just tells a story. It just goes from one, and that's why it's called a corrido,
Yeah,
because
very
it's
cool.
like a
Like
running
that.
story.
Kind of like repetitive. in a
Yeah.
way. Okay.
So it tells a story, and generally they're true stories, or they're based on something that actually happened. When I say true story, it doesn't mean it's factual per se, but it's based on something that actually happened. It's usually written at the time that the thing actually happened. So in that sense, it's like a primary source. But it's from the point of view, it's not objective. It's not like a news story per se.
Correct.
It has a definite point of view, and the point of view is what they say, del pueblo. It's of the people, of the masses. So it appeals to the masses. It's not poetry that's written for intellectuals. And so anyway, those are corridos. They really developed in Mexico, and what corridos they talk about are usually kind of tragic events often. Even these days, you think about the narco corridos, which are all about narco violence, or now there are a lot of corridos being written about the immigration experience and people trying to, the migrant experience. So they usually deal with pretty heady subjects, and often tragic subjects. They often deal with murders and death and tragic events, war. There are corridos written for not famous people, but kind of infamous people, heroes like the heroes of the Mexican Revolution. How many corridos are there about Pancho Villa?
Right.
There's a ton. Or about maybe a battle, the Toma de Juarez, when they took over Juarez during the Mexican Revolution, or La Toma de Zacatecas, or La Toma de Durango.
Yeah. I never thought about it.
Yeah, me neither.
I never thought about it, and that is exactly what it is.
Yeah. Some of the early corridos in New Mexico and in Mexico dealt with things like there would be a dance, and the guy was in love with the girl, but she was married, or she had another boyfriend, and so then he kills the guy at the dance, and so it's just, those are kind of, that's
West
a
Side
famous...
Story.
It's romantic.
all over
Yeah. That's kind of a famous corrido theme. So they deal with these tragic events, sometimes natural disasters like floods. There's a corrido de San Marcial, You know San Marcial?
No.
No.
I'm not familiar.
San Marcial, if you drive from here to Albuquerque,
Mm-hmm.
before you get to Socorro, there's a sign that says San Marcial. And it was a community over on the Rio Grande. It's, a couple of miles off the freeways, and there's nothing there now except some ruins. But it was destroyed by a flood in, I think, 1925, something like that. And so there's a corrido de San Marcial that talks all about this flood and how it destroyed all the homes and the people were homeless. And it was written at the time it happened and describes those actual events. So it's almost like an eyewitness account, but it's very personal and subjective account. Anyway, that's a corrido. And so in this book, there's this corrido which is called Toribio Huerta.
Wow.
And it says luckily there's an English translation, so I'll do that. Some of the things we'll be talking about, I'll probably talk about in Spanish. Maybe we can figure out how to do
we
a
can translate
English
it, yeah.
translation. Or that would be
Definitely.
great. Anyway, this has an English translation, so I'll just work from that. But corridos often start with like specifically saying the day or the date that something happened, and that's one of
Pretty cool.
yeah.
Yeah.
So
They
in this
do that,
case,
yeah.
it says, in 1801, I shall tell you, they hanged Mr. Huerta on the 26th of April. Well, they got the century wrong. It wasn't 1801. It was 1901.
Okay.
But that was just a typo. Or the singer, when John Donald Robb got this from a guy named Jose Fraquis from Tijeras, New Mexico, in 1950, he just got the date wrong. But he got the rest of the date right. The 26th of April, 1901. That's exactly the date that Toribio Huerta was hanged in Las Cruces.
Wow.
And then it says they took him to Las Cruces by train under heavy guard, for on the way to California he had killed his companion. From the train he went to the jail where they led him to his fate. They read him his sentence. He was sentenced to death. And then it goes into the first person. They read me my sentence and I had nothing to say. There I pleaded guilty, and that means death. And there are 13 verses, so I'm not going to read them all.
Wow.
But it basically tells this story. And so a friend of mine, a guy named Robert Torres, who's former state historian for New Mexico and a historian from Santa Fe, he wrote an article a couple of years ago for La Crónica de Nuevo Mexico, which is a magazine, a newsletter of the Historical Society of New Mexico, about several corridos about people who were executed in New Mexico because of a crime that they had committed. And one of the ones he wrote about was Toribio Huerta. So he wrote to me, and we actually, well, I'll get to this later, but we actually have a photograph of Toribio Huerta.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, with chains on his ankles, and he's
Wow.
standing next to Sheriff Jose Lucero.
Oh, wow.
Is that a name you know?
Yes.
Yes.
Former-
That we're very familiar with just from our documents.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
former sheriff of Doñana County, Jose Lucero. It's a picture of the two of them standing there together. Anyway, so he wanted to use that picture in his article, and so we started corresponding because I was interested in corridos, and so he wrote this great article. And this year at the conference of the Historical Society of New Mexico, I did a presentation about corridos in New Mexico and the borderlands. And so one of the ones I talked about was this one. So I started looking into it a little bit more, because pretty much what we had to go on was this corrido that appears in the book here.
That was your starting point.
That was just kind of the starting point, yeah.
Wow.
And so where do we go to find information? This is one of the questions for archives, right? When people come to you and they're looking for information, you have certain types of documents that you might point them toward, like probate records or deed records, or you all, I know, have
Some coroner's
reports, yeah, newspapers, which you all have newspapers here.
Newspapers.
I mentioned we have a lot of newspapers over in our archive as well. So first I did a search. There's some newspaper databases online, so I did a search in there, Toribio Huerta, and found a few articles. But all of this whole story takes place within about 2 months.
Oh, wow.
From the time he committed the murder, which was in late February 1901, until he was hanged on April 26, 1901. Everything happens right in
That
that
is
2 months.
swift justice.
That's
Yeah.
so
It is.
fast.
Yeah.
That's not. I looked into it a little bit,
Mhm.
and that's exactly what I thought. I thought, God, the sheriff was in a hurry. He was in a hurry, and I wonder
Let's get
why.
this done.
Yeah, and I thought, I wonder why.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Good question. Well, I think in general, justice was swifter back in those days. For better or for worse, it's good that we have this system that is very cautious and careful, but that wasn't the case then. So I thought, well, let me go look in these physical newspapers that we have in our collection, and we have several Spanish language, and so I knew I needed to look in March and April of 1901. So we have a couple of Spanish language titles, El Labrador and El Tiempo.
We have El Tiempo.
Uh-huh. Started looking through, and sure enough, came across, I looked first for April 26th, right? Date right around there. April 27th, there's a big newspaper, Huerta ahorcado.
Wow.
Huerta has been hanged. And there is a long newspaper article about his hanging, specifically his hanging. And Robert had not seen this article. So it starts off talking about, how they brought him out and put him up there and asked him if he had any last words. And he spoke for about 40 minutes.
Wow.
I did see, I couldn't see the full article. It wouldn't let me online. But I did see a sentence where it kind of said the sheriff was like, all right, 5 more minutes. And we're
I'll
gonna
speed this
move
up.
on.
We got something to do.
And then the editor of that newspaper had also gone to see Huerta in jail a few days before and interviewed him. And the complete transcript of his interview with Huerta is in
the
that
paper.
article as well.
Oh, that's awesome.
So that was kind of the starting point, and that was amazing to find that. Not only that, this is what really blew me away. I saw that, and I thought, oh, this is so great. On another page, there was, the day after he was hanged, there was a corrido printed in the newspaper, a corrido about his death. And it's not the corrido.
I was going to say it's a
in this
different
book.
one.
It's a different one.
Wow.
Completely different. And it was supposedly written by a friend of his, someone who was sympathetic toward him. So he's saying, poor Toribio Huerta, this has happened to him, and who's going to tell his family and all this. So that was exciting to find that. So then I started going back and trying to find all those newspaper articles, and there are a lot of them from the time the murder happened in late February. So basically what happened is there used to be a passenger rail line that ran from El Paso. The line is still there, but actually it's the line that Amtrak runs on now. But it runs from El Paso to Deming and then on to the West Coast. So that corrido said he was going to California with some companions. At one of the stops between El Paso and Deming, there's a stop called Cambrai.
Okay.
I don't think there's anything there now, but if you know where Aquila
Yes.
Flats is over there,
Yeah.
it was just south of that. It's on the rail line just south of there. So that's where this happened. There were 3 people. They were all from Mexico, and Toribio Huerta killed one of these guys, according to all the newspaper articles and according to his confession, for 43 pesos that the guy had. That's why he killed him, was to get these,
Just
to
for the
rob
money?
him of 43
Oh,
pesos.
wow.
Yeah. And so he killed the guy. We don't know who that person was. There's no name. There was another person with them, Jose Garcia, I think was his name. So the telegrapher, the guy who sends telegraph signals from the station, the train station there, telegraphed over to Las Cruces and said, we found a body. Yeah, we found a body. So Sheriff Lucero sent the coroner and a deputy out there. They examined the body, found out that he had been murdered by gunshot. Somehow they someone must have seen them because they knew that he was traveling with these two other people, and they arrested them in El Paso. I don't know how they did that, but they found these guys in El Paso and arrested them, brought them back to Las Cruces. And I can read a quick article here. Sorry.
And it was 1901?
Yeah,
Okay.
that happened in late February. I think, actually, I think the date is listed in one of the documents as maybe February 26th. But the first article in the newspaper says, Terrible crimen, and this is from the Labrador. So a terrible crime. I'll try to just translate this on the fly here. On last Friday, we received a telegram from the station at Aden announcing that a Mexican had been found dead underneath one of the bridges of the railroad. And Sheriff Lucero sent one of his deputies and the coroner to the place. They examined the body and found he had been shot by the hand of two individuals. How they figured that out, I don't know.
Right.
Who were traveling in his company with him the day before. And these two individuals were arrested in El Paso, Texas, and brought to the authorities here. The preliminary investigation before Judge Manuel Lopez. You know that name? Judge
Yep.
Manuel Lopez?
Yep.
That one of the prisoners confessed to the crime, but accusing the other guy, Toribio Huerta, of being the assassin. And not having any other motive than to rob the dead man of a little bit of dinero, a little bit of money that he had in his pocket.
Dinero.
Dinero. Un poquito de dinero que traían consigo.
Wow.
So they put him in jail here, and over the course of these 2 months, various things happened. And there are newspaper stories so he's tried at the end of March and found guilty by Judge Parker, this was in the 3rd District Court. I still haven't, I don't have the court records. So the 3rd District Court of the Territory of New Mexico was here in Doña Ana County.
Yeah, it still is, right?
Yeah,
Third
it still
Judicial
is, yes.
District,
Yeah, that's true. Those old records, you guys can probably talk about this as well, but those old records used to be here in the county, and I think it was maybe in the 1960s or 70s.
I think, yeah.
A lot of the records got transferred up to the State Archive in Santa Fe.
Yes.
And so it's hard, it can be kind of difficult to track some of these things down. And because it was, I'm still, you know a lot more about this than me, I'm trying to figure out, would that have been a court that was under federal jurisdiction?
Then, no, I think it was still state.
Okay.
I think it would have still been state.
Yeah. So I wrote to the archivist up at the State Record Center and Archive,
Yes.
and he found the docket books. They have the docket books,
Okay.
where they're listed in there, but they don't have the court records themselves. The National Archives up in Denver has court records from the 3rd Judicial District of the Territory of New Mexico, and so I've written to them to see if maybe
good.
they have them up there, but
Gosh.
haven't
How
heard
did
back
it
yet.
make its way over there to Denver?
Well, so that was the question I had.
Uh-huh.
If I don't know 3rd Judicial District, if that's a federal district, I don't know, but they have on their website, it says they have the 3rd Judicial District records of the Territory of New Mexico.
Oh.
So we'll see what we get back.
They wanted it for some reason, or whoever was in charge at the time thought that that's where they should be
Yeah.
for some reason.
Yeah.
Because I think that's what it was in the 70s as well, when some old documents got transferred to the state.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It was whoever was the clerk at that time decided that that's where they should be.
Yeah.
What's hard is that they didn't send everything.
Yeah.
So they have some, and we
Kind
have
of scrambled
some.
everywhere.
Yes.
Oh.
So we have like I would assume the majority of our coroner's reports,
Right.
but the state has some as well.
Okay.
Some of the older ones, and I think our oldest is probably 1906. I want to say. So that we probably, if there was a report, we don't have the one
Darn.
for Huerta.
Yeah, which would be interesting to see.
I
I came here the other day, and,
Yeah.
and we were looking around for it, but we weren't
Really?
able to find anything.
I'll have to look, but I think 1906 is the oldest.
One thing I
We'll
did
see.
find...
But I know
Yeah.
the state has some.
Yeah.
So they
One
might.
thing I did find when I was looking through those records was Jose Lucero's oath of office when he became
Oh,
sheriff.
yeah.
Because he just became sheriff in 1900, and this happened in early 1901, so it was one of his first
things.
big
First
Well, that's what I
things, and-
thought. He was
yeah.
he was anxious to do a hanging. And
Well-
I read an article or a piece of a newspaper article that said that the rope that was used was purchased by Pat Garrett because he
Oh,
was
wow.
he was the sheriff before Lucero.
Yeah.
Really?
And it was in the sheriff's office waiting for the next hanging, and it was purchased 3 years prior.
Uh-huh.
And so that was the rope that was used.
So they use the same rope for
Yeah.
I
Every
didn't see
hanging?
that article.
That's
You'll have
kinda
to
sad.
you'll have
Yeah.
to show me that one.
What's that one right there?
Little
The
hunting.
hangman's rope.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I'll check that out. So he was tried by Judge Parker, Frank Parker, I think was his name, Judge Parker, and found guilty. And it was a judge that sentenced him to hang por el pescuezo, which
The neck.
is the neck, until dead. And so then over the course of April, various things happen. The priest from St. Genevieve's went to see him a couple of times, Father Lassane, to see if he would get right with God, I guess, confess.
Uh-huh.
And at first he said, no, I'm not interested in confessing. I've got a lot of things on my mind. Maybe come back
Wasn't
as we
ready.
get closer to the date. And sure enough, as they got closer to the date, he did a confession. And these newspaper articles have the information about what they were saying to each other, and it's very interesting. And then as the date approaches, there's one article where they're talking about him and saying how he was in a really bad mood all the time, and what a brute he was, and that they brought him out one time so he could go eat some lunch. And as soon as he walked out, he attacked this other guy with his handcuffs and hit him in the head and knocked the guy down on the ground. And when they asked him, the deputy said, "Why did you do that?" He said, "Well, because he kept me up all night. I couldn't sleep last night because he was making too much noise or something."
an angry man.
Yeah, jeez. It's no wonder he had. I mean, it's a wonder that he had any companions at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, jeez.
Yeah, and then
It's-
and so the sheriff issued invitation cards. I'd love to find one
I
of these.
read that.
Yeah.
I read
It
that
was-
as well.
Yeah, it was
Wow.
very interesting to find it like a party invitation, This is an event.
Yeah. And one of those cards probably is still around somewhere. We just have to find it. So he issued these cards for people to come witness the event. They built a gallows. Again, the courthouse was downtown at the time. The jail was in the back of the courthouse, so I guess that would be on the north side of the courthouse, would have been the back of it. The jail was back there, and that's where they built the gallows.
Wow.
They said on the day of the hanging, about 500 people showed up to watch.
It's a lot of people for one
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
It's pretty sad.
And then again, they let him speak, and he spoke for quite a long time. And there's that wonderful newspaper article that tells his
Everything that he
words.
said?
Yeah.
Do we know anything kind of like what he said? Did he mention that he wasn't guilty or anything like that?
No, he confessed his guilt. maybe we can read this later.
Yeah.
I can send the article and,
Yeah,
and
well,
That's
we
fine.
can read it and do a voiceover or something
Cool.
of the article itself, because it's definitely worth listening to. And as well as the corrido that was published the day after the hanging. Let me look at that so we can see the difference between this one and
and the
one,
first one.
and that first one. Okay, let me see if I can find it here.
So the second one is the corrido that the one that knew him personally.
Yes, yeah.
wrote.
So here's a newspaper article. This is in English. This is from the Doñana County Republican on the 27th of April, so the day after.
We have the Republican.
And it's titled "The Execution of Toribio Huerta." The sentence pronounced on Toribio Huerta that he should be hung until dead was carried into effect yesterday morning. The trap was sprung by Deputy Bob Birch exactly at 10:45. In 10 minutes, all pulse beat stopped, and Dr. J.V. Cohen ordered him taken down at 11 o'clock. Sheriff Lucero and his deputies were busy in the morning hours making final preparations for their task, and at 10 minutes past 10, Huerta, escorted by 4 or 5 officers and administered by Father Lassane, marched from the jail to the scaffold. The prisoner seemed rather unconcerned and glanced around at the crowd, possibly to seek an acquaintance. He climbed up the scaffold steps, requiring no support. He made a momentary survey of his surroundings and then started in on a speech. His talk was so rambling that no one could understand much he said, though he talked loud enough. His thoughts were probably affected by stimulants which were given to him.
Oh.
As he became somewhat more intelligible during the last 5 minutes, he confessed of killing his victim. Again, we never know the victim's name. We've never found the victim's name. I'm thinking maybe in court records that name might appear, but stating that he needed the money and that he shot him once, and failing to kill him, shot him several more times.
Wow.
His speech lasted about 35 minutes when he announced that he was ready and bade goodbye to all. He had requested that he might give the word when the trap was to be sprung. Father Lassane asked him if he was ready, and he responded that he was. And quicker than a flash, the trap was pulled and the body disappeared from view. The rumor was current shortly after the hanging that Huerta confessed of killing several men during his lifetime, but the report of others who were just as capable of understanding as any is that they heard nothing of this nature, notwithstanding the fact that the word was quietly passed around that the execution would take place about 10:15. 500 or 600 persons were present, most of them having come at 10 or before with the evident determination of staying until the affair was over. It has been nearly 4 years since a hanging took place here, so maybe the rope had been sitting for 4 years just waiting for another. And then I think you mentioned this was the last hanging?
Public hanging.
Public hanging in Las Cruces. It's interesting. And it is hoped that it will be a long time before another hanging is necessary. So that's the English version. The Spanish language story is much more detailed. And let me see. I have that corrido here somewhere.
And I saw that there was another hanging in New Mexico at the same time, but a different county. It was what county is Las Vegas?
Las Vegas.
But it was I think
yeah.
it was in Las Vegas, New Mexico.
Yeah, that is a very famous hanging.
Yes.
It's very well known amongst Western historians.
Yeah, I did not enjoy reading about that.
Yeah, that was
So.
on the very same day. A guy, a criminal named Black Jack Ketchum, was hung up in Las Vegas. And you tell the story. What happened to him?
I don't know if I can.
Is it more graphic?
I
It
can
is
if you
very
will.
graphic.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And there was photos.
Oh my gosh.
There are
was
photos.
So apparently the rope was too long, and the gentleman was the big guy, and he was decapitated.
Oh my
His
god.
head came off.
Yeah, his head came
Wow.
off.
That's so sad.
And there's photos.
Yeah,
of
I'm not
people
watching that.
taking yeah, they took pictures
That's crazy.
with the body, and they sewed the head back on for the viewing.
Jeez.
And then he was buried. But yes, I
Wow.
thought, oh no,
Pretty sad.
yes, very, very. I was shocked. I was shocked reading about
Yeah.
it. Yeah,
I bet. And these were in a newspaper as well, or? Oh wow.
It was in the newspaper as well because it was the. I don't know. What are the chances another hanging
Yeah.
in the same state,
Same day.
same day?
Yeah.
And he
There-
was, I mean, blackjack. You hear that, right, in like westerns.
Sounds very
They
Western.
use that nickname often in movies. I think even in Zorro, the one with what's his name?
Antonio Banderas.
Yes,
Oh, is that right?
his friend I think was Blackjack.
I'm trying to get to the corrido here. Sorry.
That's all good.
and now that I think about it, in that movie, I think he's singing a corrido.
Oh,
Antonio
really?
Banderas?
Yeah, he's singing one about Blackjack.
You know, it's kind of crazy because I think when I think corridos now, I think something happy, something you can dance to at a wedding, at a quinceañera, and I didn't know that they held so much historical meaning.
I think the instrumental
Mm-hmm.
is that, but if you listen to the words, they're stories.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty cool.
So this is the corrido that appeared in the newspaper on the El Tiempo on April 27th, the day after he was hung. And I translated it, so I'll read the English translation. It says, "To Huerta, at the request of someone from this place, we publish the following verses dedicated to Toribio Huerta, following exactly the original. This is a sorrowful goodbye to the famed," now he's famed, "Toribio Huerta. On the 26th of April, his life has ended. The year of 1901, when the case happened, that poor Toribio Huerta died in Las Cruces. The they keep calling him the poor, el pobre Toribio Huerta, was satisfied with the jury and judge for the sentence they gave him. The poor Toribio Huerta, ay, what a mess, that on the 26th of April they have hung him in Las Cruces. Year of 1901, what is it we are saying about him? Toribio Huerta was hanged without his brothers knowing. Toribio Huerta said, very sad and with affliction, I wish my parents could give me their blessing." Okay, mi bendición. "Goodbye, friends and brothers. I say goodbye with pleasure, and I say to the sheriff that he show me my grave. The one that composed these verses is not a poet or a troubadour. He's a friend of Huerta, who is a true laborer."
Huh.
Interesting, the shift in how he's being viewed there.
Huge.
In several of the news articles that I saw, they mentioned that Toribio Huerta, while he was in jail, he himself was writing verses that were sort of his goodbye to the world. And
I had read that also.
you
that-
saw those?
Yeah.
Well, guess what? I found it.
No.
They published it in May in the Labrador.
Wow.
Let's see here. They gotta zoom in. I can see this. So this one, I assume, this is what he himself wrote, because it's all in the first person. And he talks about, I won't go through all of it, and I haven't translated this one, but basically he's talking about, that it's up to God to judge him, not up to men to judge him.
He's just going through his emotions, probably. Just going through it.
Yeah, no man on earth can take away our existence. That's only decreed to divine providence. pretty good writing,
I was
actually.
gonna say, it sounds
Yeah.
like she was
Pretty poetic, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And he talks about how he's going to see, when I go to see Christ, they're going to ask, Toribio, are you ready? And I'm going to say, yes, I am. They put the blindfold on my face, and they're going to execute me to comply with the law and send me to eternity. Goodbye, all the nations. I'm going to rest. Goodbye, Las Cruces. I'm going to the valley of Josaphat. I guess that's heaven. And he says, Father Pedro Lassane asked me with valor, are you ready, Toribio? And I said, yes, I'm ready, Señor. And that's the end of it. And then they pulled the handle. And
That's crazy.
anyway, so that's what I'm calling El Corrido de Toribio Huerta. And it's kind of a story, but I'm telling you got to read these news articles. They're so interesting. And there's so much that I haven't been able to bring out.
To the articles.
Yeah.
So that people can read them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it puts the story together when you read these articles.
Right.
So
right.
it's pretty cool. Thank you
That's-
for bringing this topic.
Oh yeah. Happy to do it.
Cool.
Yeah, and it was interesting to do a little bit of research, but I couldn't really find too much. But different hangings in New Mexico did come up, and one was of a female.
Oh,
Yeah, but it was in the 1800s, Paula Angel.
Okay.
And the first and I think only hanging. And it said that she murdered her lover because she found out he was married.
I mean,
She was only 19.
Wow.
She was only 19.
oh wow, okay.
There's a corrido.
Is
About
there?
her too?
You're
Yes.
Wow.
kidding.
In Robert Torres's article, that's one of the cases that he talks about, and there's a corrido.
There's a corrido
Yeah.
about her.
Yep.
Wow.
Wow.
That'll have to be another topic.
Yeah.
well, I read an interesting article that took place in 1937. They interviewed the sheriff, Lucero, and he was talking about the hanging and how he spoke for so long, and he covered his head with a blindfold or a hat that covered his eyes, and he asked, are you ready? And he said, yes, I'm ready. And apparently the crowd heard him ask, are you ready? Because that was kind of a catchphrase in the town for a little while after the hanging.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
You know, ready, Huerta?
Oh wow.
Yeah.
That was a
Wow.
catchphrase
Yeah.
in the town.
Interesting. I
Yeah.
want to see that
Crazy.
article. I haven't seen that one either.
Yeah, I'll
I
show
gotta
you
see
that
that.
one. Yeah.
So they interviewed Sheriff Lucero
Right.
like 35 years later. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's great.
Yeah, years later.
Mm-hmm.
So you said this was the last public hanging. Do we know what happened in that time that kind of shifted public viewings for hangings, maybe
Yeah.
from being seen?
don't.
No. Okay.
Maybe
That's
it
a good
was
question.
Blackjack Ketchum's.
Maybe.
That was too brutal, yeah.
That could have had some,
Sheesh.
yeah.
Oh.
Could imagine that would.
It wasn't. I don't think it was the last hanging in New Mexico,
Okay.
but it was the last
Just in
hanging in
Doñana.
Las Cruces. Yeah,
Las
it was in
Cruces.
Doñana, yeah.
Okay.
Mhm.
Or maybe
Cool.
just Las Cruces, I don't
You
know.
never know.
But yeah.
Pretty crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the last hanging in New Mexico was in the 20s. I think in the 20s.
Okay.
That's what I read.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one interesting thing that comes out of this and what we're talking about is sources, sources for history, right? Because when you think about history that gets written, where does that information come from? It's not coming from other books, because that's secondhand information. Somebody writes about it. You can read about things that happened in books, but when you really want to get back to the source, back to the original, the primary sources when you're doing historical research like this. And that can be things like newspaper articles and court records, and sometimes in family papers there could be, and this is something that I hope to explore as well, in some correspondence that we have in our collection from 1901, where someone writes that, oh, today they hung Toribio Huerta,
Yeah.
and I was there in the crowd, and you might get a firsthand, you know,
Wow.
I don't know if that exists, but it certainly,
You never know, yeah.
certainly
I mean,
possible.
with that large of a crowd, you would think
Yeah.
Yeah.
that there was probably.
And I'm sure the population here was not what it is, nearly what it is today. So that must have been
People
a
probably
large
traveled.
population. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like a party. If you had invitations out, sent out, which is
Yeah.
pretty crazy.
Right. And then interviews, like you were saying,
Yeah.
Sheriff
Right.
Lucero was interviewed. Interviews are another great source of information. There's a methodology in history called oral history, where you sit down and talk to someone in depth about their life experiences. And again, it's sort of like the corridos. It's not necessarily the truth, right? It's somebody's experience of life,
Right.
experience of events, and their point of view of certain events,
In the recollection.
their recollections. Yeah.
I need to do that with my grandma.
Yes.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, that would be great. Your grandma was she from here?
Yes,
Yeah.
we have a long history here.
Uh
Yes.
huh. Okay.
Maybe you should ask her about, like, if she knows anything about this story. If in the family, it's the story has
If they ever
been
talked
passed
about
down
it.
or anything. Yeah.
Yeah, you never know.
You never know. Pretty cool stuff.
Right. Unfortunately, there's probably no one around now. Well, of course, there's no one around. Well,
You never know.
my wife was just telling me about someone she was reading about who's 127 years old.
Wow.
Technically, if that person was alive when Toribio Huerta was hanged, so would have been
Might
a
have been
small
very
child.
young, yeah.
And I don't think it was here in Las Cruces where that person lives, but there are people who do get to that age. But in general, there's probably no one around in Las Cruces who
Yeah.
would have been here at that time.
No, but stories get passed down, and then
True.
you verify them with, these news articles and these corridos that are pretty cool. They're a window into history as well. I
Right.
didn't know that. It's pretty
Yeah.
awesome.
So another thing I would mention is that this corridos are songs.
Yeah.
You guys were talking about you go to the baile and they're playing the corridos. So they're musical. They're not. It's not poetry. It's not meant to be read
Yeah.
as poetry. It's music. They're
Yeah.
songs, and that's the way that they're passed down. And they would often have been passed down just because there's different versions. It's because maybe I know the corrido, and at some point you come and visit me, and you learn it from me, and then
Yeah.
you take it. But you just learn it. It's not written down. You just
Yeah.
learn it, and then so you change things because you can't remember everything, and so that's the way. It's oral tradition, and
Yeah.
folk music is like an oral tradition in that sense. It's nice that in these cases the lyrics were written down, but there's no music. So no one, as far as I know, today knows what the corrido
is.
of Toribio Huerta sounds like. John Donald Robb heard someone sing it in 1950.
Right.
I don't know that he recorded it because I've looked at the recordings which are available at the University of New Mexico, and I couldn't find the recording of this corrido. So in that sense, if we want to hear it again, someone's got to
Make it up.
make up a tune for it.
Let's go, Bern. Let's
All right.
do this.
I did this recently with, there's a historian in town, Carl Lombach, who was doing research about a sheriff up in Sierra County, a guy named Francisco Bojorquez. And it's a really interesting person, hero. And when he died, someone wrote a corrido about Francisco Bojorquez. And Carl had the lyrics to the corrido. And so I said, oh, really? Send them to me. So he sent them to me. And then he gave a presentation recently, and he said, hey, Dennis, are you singing that corrido yet of Francisco Bojorquez? And I was like, well, he sent it to me. It was 35 verses.
Wow.
Nice.
So like kind of overwhelming. And I said, no. And he said, well, I'm doing this presentation. It'd be great if you could sing the corrido. I said, okay. I committed to it. And so I did. And there were family members there of Francisco Bojorquez. This corrido, no one had ever heard it before.
Wow.
And so I used a different melody because we don't know what the original melody was for it. But that was pretty fun.
Wow.
Cool.
That's amazing.
That's awesome.
That's awesome.
So
Cool.
I will put a melody to the corrido of Toribio Huerta. And
Good.
someday, if you ever get down to the Spotted Dog on a Sunday afternoon, you might hear me sing it.
Sounds good. We'll be there.
Yeah, send out an invitation.
Yeah. I'll send out 500 invitations.
Special event.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I'll never hear Corrido the same again. I'm
Me
definitely
neither.
gonna listen to the lyrics.
Yeah, me too. I'm curious to listen back to some of the ones that I'm familiar with and
And the old ones.
see if there's
that
a
you
story
hear.
to it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Pretty cool.
Dennis, thank you so much. For
Yeah, thank
sharing
you.
this.
We
This has been
appreciate
a lot of
it.
fun.
Amazing
Yeah, thank
story.
you.
Fun.
Yeah, it's great.
Well, that does it for this episode of Preserving History and Democracy. We'd like to thank our special guest once again, Dennis Daly, for discussing this topic with us. If people want more information on the NMSU library, where can they find you?
The website online is probably the best place to find us. You can just go to the NMSU library website, and then we're linked from there. And there's information about our hours, where we're located, how to come visit us. There's a lot of resources. These finding aids, these guides that we have to our collections are all online. We have about 50,000 photographs from our collection online that people can look through, and a lot of resources are online. But we really encourage people to actually come visit us and do research in our research room and use the materials that we have, whether you're just interested in the history of the area, or if you have family that were from here, or for whatever reason.
This episode was hosted by myself, Communications Coordinator Cynthia Mendoza, our producer Bernardine Caporale, and our recording and filing supervisor Angelica Valenzuela. And of course, it was edited by Jacob Slaughter behind the camera.
Yeah, Jacob.
Thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.